Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about deep space, the really inconvenient truth that nobody mentioned in the recruitment brochures, was that it was mind-numbingly boring. Oh sure, the posters showed gleaming starships carving through nebulae, exotic alien markets overflowing with mysterious goods, and crews of plucky adventurers sharing laughs over meals that somehow looked appetizing despite being synthesized from recycled. Well, best not to think too hard about that. What they didn't show was the endless stretches of absolutely nothing happening, punctuated by brief moments of routine maintenance, followed by more nothing, with a side order of tedium for dessert, which was exactly how Randall preferred it. The mess hall of the Nebula's drift was quiet during late cycle, the way Randall liked it. Most of the crew had turned in, leaving only the soft hum of the life support systems and the occasional groan of the hull adjusting to temperature fluctuations. Randall sat alone at a corner table, the kind of spot that said, "I am here. I am technically social. But please, for the love of all that is holy, leave me alone." In his hands, he held a knife. Not just any knife, mind you. This wasn't some replicated piece of stamped metal you could order from a ship's supply catalog. This was old, worn smooth in places where hands had gripped it for years, the blade showing the telltale signs of being sharpened so many times it had developed a personality. The edge caught the dim overhead lighting as Randall worked a small cloth along its length, his movements methodical, almost meditative. The blade itself was about 8 inches long, single-edged, with a slight curve that suggested it had opinions about what it wanted to cut. But it was the handle that told the real story, if you knew how to read it. Etched, engraved, stamped, and scratched, into the metal were dozens of small marks, symbols, and what might have been words in various languages. To a casual observer, they might have looked decorative, quaint even, like someone had gotten really enthusiastic with a laser engraver during a particularly dull voyage. To anyone who knew what they were looking at, they told a very different story. Randall ran the cloth along the blade one more time, checked the edge with his thumb, a habit he'd never quite broken, despite knowing perfectly well the knife was sharp enough to split a molecule if it felt ambitious, and then set about cleaning the small wooden handle. Wood. On a starship. Another little detail that spoke volumes, if you were paying attention. Most people weren't. That was also how Randall preferred it. He'd been working on the Nebula's drift for about 6 months now, officially listed as a maintenance technician, which was true, in the same way that saying water was wet was true. Technically accurate, but missing a considerable amount of context. He fixed things when they broke, kept the environmental systems running, and generally made himself useful in the dozens of small ways that kept a merchant vessel from becoming a very expensive coffin drifting through the void. The other crew members had quickly learned that Randall was the quiet type. Showed up for his shifts, did his work, kept to himself, didn't join in the card games, didn't share stories during meals, didn't participate in the general gossip that made up the social glue of any long-haul crew. He was polite enough, never rude, just distant, like a moon orbiting a planet. Technically part of the system, but maintaining a comfortable distance from the messier gravitational pull of interpersonal drama. And that had been working out just fine. Thank you very much, until Nilok decided to be friendly. Nilok was new. 3 weeks new to be precise, which in ship terms meant he was still figuring out which corridors led where, and hadn't yet learned the unspoken rules that governed crew interactions. He was Rethani, which meant he looked like someone had taken a mantis, scaled it up to human size, given it 4 arms instead of the traditional 2, and installed a nervous system that ran on pure, unfiltered curiosity. The Rithani were known throughout the civilized galaxy as scholars, researchers, and generally peaceful beings who approached the universe with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered that libraries existed. They were also known for being absolutely terrible at reading social cues, particularly human ones, which was how Nilok found himself approaching Randall's table with all the self-preservation instinct of a moth eyeing a particularly attractive flame. "Good evening, Randall." Nilok's voice had that characteristic clicking undertone that came from having mandibles instead of lips. His compound eyes, each about the size of a human fist, reflected the mess hall lighting in a kaleidoscope of colors. "I hope I am not disturbing your—" "Ah." He tilted his head, a gesture that on a Rithani looked less like curiosity and more like someone trying to read fine print on a distant sign. "What are you doing, exactly?" Randall didn't look up. "Maintenance?" "Ah, maintenance. Yes, of course. That is your specialty." Nilok's enthusiasm was undeterred by Randall's tone, which had all the warmth of a cargo bay with a broken heater. "But that appears to be a knife, not a ship component? Unless—" He leaned closer, his antennae twitching with interest. "Unless the nebula's drift has implemented some new form of manual interface system I am not aware of." "It's my knife," Randall said, still not looking up. "I'm cleaning it." "Fascinating. I was not aware that Earth-origin cutting implements required such regular maintenance. Is this a cultural practice? A ritual, perhaps? I have read that humans often assign significant emotional value to objects associated with. It keeps it sharp." "Ah." Nilok paused, processing this. "So, it is purely practical then, not ceremonial. Though I suppose the line between practical and ceremonial can be quite blurred in many cultures, particularly when it comes to—" "Nilok," Randall interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes, a shade of brown that could most charitably be described as unremarkable, met Nilok's compound gaze. "Was there something you needed?" The Rithani's antennae drooped slightly, a gesture that, on his species, indicated embarrassment. "Ah, no, not as such. I simply noticed you sitting alone and thought, well, I am still quite new to the crew, and I have been attempting to engage in what I understand humans call social bonding. The manual I studied suggested that showing interest in a colleague's activities is an appropriate way to— You read a manual on making friends? 3 manuals, actually. Human social interaction is remarkably complex, and the texts often contradicted each other, so I felt it prudent to— Nilok stopped, his antennae perking up again as something caught his attention. "Oh, those markings on your knife. Are those decorative? They are quite intricate." And there it was. The moment Randall had been hoping to avoid. He should have been more careful. Should have waited until he was back in his quarters, where privacy was guaranteed and curious aliens with compound eyes couldn't get a good look at things that were, frankly, none of their business. But 6 months of quiet routine had made him complacent. And now here was Nilok, leaning over the table with all 4 of his arms braced against the surface, his enormous eyes focused on the blade, with the kind of intensity usually reserved for scientific discoveries. "They're just marks," Randall said, his voice carefully neutral. "Nothing interesting." But Nilok wasn't listening anymore. He was reading. See, here's the thing about the Rithani. They didn't just have excellent eyesight. They had the kind of eyesight that could spot a comma from across a room. Compound eyes weren't just for show. And Nilok, being a navigator, had spent considerable time studying military insignias, unit markers, and the various symbols that different species used to denote rank, affiliation, and operational history, which meant that as he leaned closer, his eyes widening with each passing second, he was beginning to recognize exactly what he was looking at. That is a Terran military designation, Nilok said slowly, his voice dropping to something approaching a whisper. And that one, is that from the Contact Wars? But that was 15 cycles ago, and those units were— He trailed off, his antennae going completely rigid. Randall, what exactly did you do before you became a maintenance technician? Randall set down his cleaning cloth, very carefully, and picked up the knife. He held it up to the light, examining the blade as if checking for any spots he might have missed, though they both knew that wasn't what he was doing. He was buying time, deciding how to handle this. Finally, he sighed. It was the kind of sigh that carried the weight of someone who knew that a comfortable situation had just become decidedly uncomfortable, and there was no putting that particular genie back in its bottle. Nilok, he said quietly, you ever hear the expression, curiosity killed the cat? The Rathani blinked, all 6 sections of his compound eyes clicking shut and open in sequence. We do not have cats on my homeworld, but I understand the metaphorical implication. You are suggesting that my inquiry is unwelcome and potentially dangerous to my well-being? I'm suggesting, Randall said, setting the knife down on the table between them, that some stories are better left alone, and some marks— He gestured at the engravings. Some marks are just reminders. For me. Not meant for anyone else. Nilok's antennae were trembling now, a sign of either extreme excitement or extreme anxiety. Possibly both. But that emblem, the one near the handle, that is the insignia of the Terran Reclamation Corps, the TRC. But that unit is— He paused, struggling with the words. Randall, the Terran Reclamation Corps is a myth, a piece of human propaganda used during the Contact Wars to frighten enemy combatants. They were not real. The Galactic military history databases list them as psychological warfare, nothing more. Randall picked up his knife, slid it carefully into a leather sheath he'd been keeping under the table, and stood up. Then I guess you've got nothing to worry about, he said. Just a maintenance tech with a fancy knife. Good night, Nilok. He turned to leave, but Nilok's voice stopped him. The other emblems, the Rathani said, his voice barely above a whisper. I recognize 3 others. Operation Crimson Gate, the Rimward Siege, and that coordinate stamp. Those are deep void markers, the kind only used for classified insertion points. He looked up at Randall, and for the first time since approaching the table, something other than curiosity showed in those compound eyes. It was fear. Maintenance techs, Nilok said slowly, do not carry knives like that. Randall stood there for a long moment, weighing his options. He could walk away, let Nilok's imagination run wild, and deal with the inevitable rumors. He could deny everything, play dumb, hope the Rathani would convince himself he'd misread the markings. Or— He sat back down. You want to know about the Rimward Siege? Randall asked, his voice carrying a tone that suggested this was not actually a question, but rather the opening line of a story that Nilok was about to hear whether he wanted to or not. Fine. Pull up a chair, Nilok. But understand something first. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some stories don't end at all. They just pause. And the people in them? They just keep moving, trying to leave the story behind, even though they know it's carved into them just as surely as those marks are carved into that knife. Nilok, demonstrating either tremendous bravery or tremendous stupidity, The line between the two being remarkably thin, sat down. And Randall, with another one of those sighs that seemed to carry the weight of years, began to talk. 15 cycles ago, Randall began, his fingers drumming once against the table before going still, there was a human colony called Rimward Station. Stupid name, I know, but colonists aren't known for their creativity. It was perched on the edge of what we diplomatically called disputed space, which is politician speak for nobody wanted it until somebody else claimed it. Nilok had gone very still, his antennae flat against his head in a posture of intense concentration. In the background, the ship's environmental systems hummed their endless song, but in the little bubble of space around their table, the only sound was Randall's voice. The station had maybe 3,000 people, farmers mostly, tech workers, families. Randall's eyes were focused somewhere past Nilok, seeing something that wasn't in the mess hall. Then the Marauder clans decided they wanted the planet. Not for any good reason, mind you. Just because it was there, and because humans had it. And because Marauders are, as a general rule, unpleasant individuals with boundary issues. I have read about the Marauder incursions, Nilok said quietly. They were brutal. Brutal, Randall repeated, as if testing the word. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another way would be genocidal, but brutal works too, I suppose. Anyway, the colonial governor sends out a distress call. Standard procedure. Problem was, Rimward Station was 3 weeks from the nearest military outpost, and the Marauders weren't known for their patience. The station had maybe 5 days before they'd be overrun. He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. It wasn't a pleasant expression. So, Command makes a call. They send in the TRC. But the TRC was not real, Nilok protested weakly. Right, not real. Which is why 6 operators in a stealth ship that officially didn't exist got dropped into a combat zone that officially wasn't a combat zone to rescue a governor who officially hadn't called for help. Randall's tone was dry as lunar dust. Funny how many things can officially not happen while actively happening. Nilok's mandibles clicked nervously. 6 operators? Against an entire Marauder clan? Against 3 clans, actually. Turns out, Rimward Station was more valuable than anyone thought. Something about mineral deposits. The Marauders had brought about 400 fighters, plus support personnel. We had 6 people, 1 ship, and a mission brief that basically said, extract the governor, retrieve any intelligence data, try not to die, but if you do die, deny everything. That seems inadequate. You'd think, wouldn't you? Randall leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking slightly. But here's the thing about humans, Nilok. The thing that makes the rest of the galaxy nervous. We're really, really good at what we're really, really bad at. You know what I mean? Nilok's antennae twitched in confusion. I do not, actually. We're terrible at peace. We get bored, we get complacent, we get soft. But war, violence, controlled chaos? Randall tapped the table once. We've been practicing that since we learned to pick up sticks and hit each other with them. Thousands of years of refinement. It's practically in our genetic code at this point. The Rathani shifted uncomfortably. His species had never developed warfare beyond minor territorial disputes, and the concept of violence as a craft, a skill to be honed, was deeply unsettling. The mission was supposed to be simple, Randall continued. Drop in, locate the governor, exfiltrate under cover of darkness, maybe blow up a few Marauder supplies on the way out for fun. Clean, quiet, professional. He paused. Then our ship took a hit during insertion. Pilot, good man, died 2 cycles ago. Natural causes, which surprised all of us, managed to crash land us in the supply district, right on top of a marauder ammunition depot. Oh no! Oh yes, big explosion, very big, very loud, so much for stealth. Randall's expression was somewhere between amusement and resignation. We'd just announced our presence to 400 very angry marauders who now knew exactly where we were. Our ship was slag. Extraction was impossible. And the governor? Turns out he was holed up in the command center on the other side of the colony, with about 60 civilians. Nilok was leaning forward now, despite his obvious fear. There was something compelling about the way Randall told the story, matter of fact and stripped of heroics, which somehow made it more terrifying. "So, what did you do?" the Rithani asked. "We improvised, found a supply depot, not ours, thankfully, and decided to hold it. The building was solid, good sight lines, only 3 entry points. The governor and his people were safe enough for the moment, but they couldn't get to us, and we couldn't get to them. So we sent a message. Hold tight. We'll come get you when we clear a path. With 6 people. With 5, actually. Lost 1 in the crash." Randall's voice didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "We held that depot for 8 days. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. 8 days, Nilok repeated, against 400 marauders. They tried rushing us the first day. Lost about 30 fighters in the first hour. Marauders are tough, I'll give them that. But they're not tactical. They rely on numbers and aggression. Works great against scared colonists. Works less great against entrenched positions manned by people who've made a career out of not dying in situations exactly like this one." Randall pulled the knife back out of its sheath, not threatening, just present. His thumb traced one of the engravings absently. "Day 2, they tried a siege, cut our power, cut our water, figured they'd starve us out. What they didn't know was that TRC operators carry enough compact rations to survive for 2 weeks, and we'd found a water recycler in the depot. Day 3, they tried gas. We sealed the building. Day 4, they tried fire. We put it out. Day 5? How?" Nilok interrupted. "How did 5 individuals withstand such overwhelming numbers?" Randall looked at him, and there was something ancient in that gaze, something that made the Rithani wish he'd never approached that table. "Because we wanted to live more than they wanted us dead," Randall said simply. "And because we were willing to do things they couldn't imagine. Every attack they launched, we turned back. Every fighter they sent, we put down. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, just out of pure practical necessity. This is the thing about humans, Nilok. We can compartmentalize. We can take all the messy emotions and lock them away. And what's left is just efficiency. Mathematics. Problem solving. That sounds cold. It was. On day 6, the marauders brought up heavy weapons. Thought they'd just level the building with us in it. We took out their gun positions before they could fire. Day 8, they'd lost so many fighters that the clans started arguing among themselves. One clan leader wanted to pull out entirely, cut his losses. Another wanted to call in reinforcements. While they were arguing, our relief force finally arrived. Relief force? Turns out 3 clans getting mauled by a handful of humans was embarrassing enough that Command decided to send in a proper military response. A destroyer, 2 frigates, and enough Marines to secure the entire colony. Randall sheathed the knife again. We walked out of that depot, linked up with the governor and his civilians, and evacuated them without another shot fired. Mission accomplished. Nilok sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he said, "The engravings. Those are from Rimward Station?" "Some of them. Each mark is a reminder. Not a trophy, not a boast. Just a reminder that I was there, that it happened, that it's part of who I am." Randall stood again. "And before you ask about the others, the answer is no. Some stories stay locked away, Nilok. Some things don't need to be remembered out loud." The Rathani's antennae drooped. "I apologize. I should not have pried. It was inappropriate and—" "It's fine," Randall said, cutting him off. "You didn't know. Now you do. Just do me a favor and keep it to yourself, yeah? I'm happy being a maintenance tech. That life?" He gestured at the knife. "It's over. I'm retired." As Randall turned to leave, Nilok called out one more time. "Randall! If the TRC was so effective, why did humanity claim they did not exist?" Randall paused at the doorway. "Because effective and ethical aren't the same thing, Nilok. And sometimes the galaxy sleeps better not knowing what humanity's capable of when pushed. Trust me on that." He left the Rathani sitting alone in the mess hall, staring at the EQE spot where the knife had been, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Turns out he had. But that revelation was still a few minutes away. In the corridor outside, a Peltheran trader named Olani had been passing by, and her species was known for two things: excellent hearing and excellent memory. She'd heard the name Randall, combined with the words Rimward Station and TRC, and unlike Nilok, she knew exactly what that meant. Olani had been trading in fringe space for 20 cycles, which in Peltheran years meant she was old enough to remember the contact wars firsthand, and smart enough to have survived them by knowing exactly when to run, when to hide, and when to pretend she hadn't seen or heard anything incriminating. This situation, she decided, as she pressed herself flat against the corridor wall outside the mess hall, definitely qualified as incriminating. Peltherans were amphibious, which meant Olani's skin had that slightly damp, mottled appearance that humans found unsettling and other species found unremarkable. She was short, barely coming up to an average human's chest, with large eyes adapted for underwater vision and webbed fingers that were surprisingly dexterous. Right now, those fingers were trembling slightly as she processed what she'd just overheard. Randall. Maintenance tech Randall, who fixed the environmental systems and kept to himself, and seemed about as threatening as a potted plant. Randall, who was apparently one of the most dangerous humans in the known galaxy. The TRC had been nightmare fuel during the contact wars. Every species had their version of the story, whispered in trading posts and military barracks. The humans had unleashed something, a special operations unit so effective and so brutal that even mentioning them was considered psychological warfare. Except nobody could prove they existed. No official records, no confirmed sightings, just stories and body counts, and the occasional survivor who swore they'd seen ghosts in human skin. Olani had always assumed it was propaganda. Humans were good at war, sure, but the TRC stories were too fantastical. Operators who could hold off armies, who could infiltrate anywhere, eliminate anyone, disappear without a trace. It sounded like something out of a cheap thriller novel. Except now she'd just heard one of them casually discussing holding off 400 marauders for 8 days, like it was a minor inconvenience. She needed to tell someone. Captain Indra needed to know. The crew needed to know. They had been flying through space for 6 months with a... Wait. A cold realization washed over Olani, raising the small ridge of scales along her spine. Captain Indra was human. Captain Indra, who was former military herself, who'd hired Randall specifically, who always seemed remarkably calm about taking routes through dangerous space. Captain Indra knew. "Oh, you clever, clever woman," Olani muttered in her native tongue, a series of clicks and whistles that the ship's translator mercifully didn't pick up. Before she could decide what to do with this information, the ship's alarm began to shriek. Not the gentle alert that meant someone had burned something in the galley again, or the moderate warning that indicated a minor systems failure. This was the full, blaring, "everyone panic now" alarm that meant something very bad was happening very quickly. Olani's communication implant crackled to life, Captain Indra's voice cutting through the alarm. "All crew to cargo bay? Now. We have visitors, and they're not the friendly kind." Pirates. Of course it was pirates, because this day wasn't complicated enough already. Olani scrambled toward the cargo bay, her webbed feet making soft, slapping sounds against the deck plating. Other crew members were emerging from their quarters, various states of alertness and species represented in the general confused migration toward the designated gathering point. Nilok practically collided with her at an intersection, his forearms flailing as he tried to maintain balance. "Olani! What is happening? Are we under attack? I thought this was a safe shipping lane." "Safe is relative," Olani said, grabbing one of his arms and pulling him along. "Move, before whoever's out there decides to start venting atmosphere for fun." The cargo bay was already crowded by the time they arrived. 23 crew members, representing 8 different species, all wearing expressions ranging from terrified to resigned. Captain Indra stood on the loading platform, her arms crossed, her face set in that particular expression that humans got when they were furious, but trying very hard to remain professional. She was tall for a human female, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair that had just started showing gray at the temples. Former military, definitely, though she'd never specified which branch or what rank. She ran the nebula's drift with efficiency and fairness, paid well, and asked very few questions about her crew's backgrounds. "Listen up," Indra said, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "We've been intercepted by what appears to be an Ornathi raiding party. 3 ships, armed, and they've already disabled our engines. They're demanding we prepare for boarding." A collective groan went through the crew. Ornathi pirates were bad news. The Ornathi were reptilian, aggressive, territorial, and had a thriving slave trade that made them pariahs in civilized space. Getting captured by Ornathi meant, at best, being sold to the highest bidder. At worst, well, the Ornathi had some dietary habits that other species preferred not to think about. "Options?" someone called out from the back. "Limited," Indra said flatly. "We're a merchant vessel. We have exactly 4 pulse rifles, 2 of which haven't been fired in 5 cycles, and probably don't work. Our shields are designed to protect against debris, not weapons fire. Fighting is not on the table. So we surrender." This from a Talaxian cargo handler, his 3 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "We cooperate," Indra corrected. "We let them board. We don't resist. We stay calm. Most pirates aren't interested in killing crew if they don't have to. Bad for business. They'll take what they want, maybe ransom a few of us, and leave." Olani noticed that Indra's eyes were scanning the crowd, looking for someone, looking for Randall, who wasn't there. The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Olani caught it. Oh yes, she definitely knew what Randall was, and she was trying to figure out where he'd gone. The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged. The Ornathi were coming aboard. "Remember," Indra said, her voice calm despite the situation, "cooperation means survival. Do not provoke them. Do not resist. Do not play hero. Understood? A chorus of nervous affirmatives answered her. The cargo bay door began to open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded far too ominous for simple mechanics. Through the widening gap, Olani could see the boarding tube that had been forced onto the hull, and beyond that, the Ornathi ship. Dark metal, aggressive angles, covered in what looked like trophies welded to the exterior plating. The first Ornathi through the door was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that looked like natural armor. He carried a weapon that was essentially a plasma cannon with delusions of subtlety. Behind him came more, at least 15 that Olani could count, each armed, each radiating the kind of casual menace that came from knowing you were the apex predator in any given situation. The leader. It had to be the leader, given the elaborate scarring on its face and the way the others deferred to it, stopped at the edge of the loading ramp and surveyed the gathered crew with eyes that were disturbingly intelligent. "I am Moltrek," it said, the ship's translator rendering its hissing speech into flat, menacing words. "This vessel is now under my authority. You will be evaluated. The useful will be kept. The rest—" It made a gesture that needed no translation. Captain Indra stepped forward. "I'm the captain. Whatever you're here for, there's no need for violence. We're a legitimate merchant vessel, registered with—" "I do not care about your registrations, human." Moltrek descended the ramp, each step deliberate, calculated to intimidate. "Your ship, your cargo, and your crew now belong to me. The Ornathi Collective has use for all 3. "The Collective doesn't operate in this sector," Indra said, her voice steady. "You're independent raiders, which means you're businessmen. So let's talk business. What's your price for letting us go?" Moltrek laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Bold, for someone with no leverage, but I admire the attempt." He gestured, and his crew began fanning out, weapons raised, surrounding the gathered crew members. "You want to negotiate? Fine. Where is your most valuable cargo?" "Manifest is in the bridge computer," Indra said. "Raw materials, mostly. Refined metals, some luxury goods. Nothing worth killing for." "I will decide what is worth killing for." Moltrek's eyes narrowed. "How many crew?" 24, including me." "I count 23. There was a pause. Olani felt her gills flutter nervously. Indra's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "My mistake. 23. Lying to me is unwise, Captain." Moltrek moved closer, looming over Indra. "Where is the missing crew member?" "Probably hiding," Indra said with a shrug. "We're not a military vessel. Some people don't handle stress well." Moltrek studied her for a long moment, then turned to one of his subordinates. "Search the ship. Find the coward. Kill them if they resist. Bring them here if they don't." 3 Ornathi peeled off from the group, moving toward the corridor exits. Olani caught Nilok's eye. The Rithani's antennae were flat against his head, and she could read the terror in his compound eyes. He'd figured it out, too. They'd just sent 3 pirates to hunt down someone who'd held off 400 marauders for 8 days. This was either going to end very badly for the pirates or very badly for everyone. Possibly both. In the maintenance tunnels above the cargo bay, wedged into a service duct that most species couldn't even fit into, Randall heard the orders being given. He looked down at the knife in his hand, at the engravings that told stories he'd tried so hard to leave behind. He sighed. "So much for retirement," he muttered, and began moving through the ducts with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this exact thing far too many times before. The first Ornathi to die didn't even have time to realize he was in danger. One moment he was checking a junction in the maintenance corridor, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning for heat signatures. The next moment, a hand clamped over his snout from behind, and something very sharp slid between his scales at precisely the right angle. The Ornathi's nervous system shut down before his brain could register pain, and Randall lowered the body silently to the deck, already moving to the next position. 2 more to go in this group. Then the real problem began. The second Ornathi was smarter, more cautious. He'd noticed that his partner had gone silent on the communication channel, and he was starting to suspect that the coward they were hunting might be something else entirely. He pressed himself against a bulkhead, weapon ready, his forked tongue tasting the air for chemical signatures. He never thought to look up. Randall dropped from an overhead access panel, landing on the Ornathi's shoulders with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory. The pirate tried to shout, tried to bring his weapon around, but Randall's arm was already around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery. Ornathi physiology was different from human, but the EUD principle remained the same. Cut off blood to the brain. Consciousness fades in seconds. The pirate went limp. Randall lowered him to the deck, checked the corridor, and moved on. The third Ornathi found his 2 companions unconscious. Randall had left them alive deliberately, a message, and immediately activated his communicator. "Moltrek, we have a problem. Someone took out Rexic and Novel. The missing crew member is—" He never finished the sentence. Randall came through a doorway the pirate hadn't even known was there, and this time there was no stealth, no subtlety. Just brutal, efficient violence that ended with the Ornathi on the ground and Randall standing over him, breathing slightly harder than before. Getting old, he thought wryly. Time was, 3 targets wouldn't even wind me. His communicator, he'd lifted it from the first pirate, crackled to life. Moltrek's voice, angry now, suspicious. "Report! What is happening?" Randall considered his options. He could stay silent, let Moltrek wonder. He could lie, buy more time. Or he keyed the communicator. "Your 3 friends are taking a nap. Well, 2 of them are. The third one might need medical attention, possibly also a chiropractor." Silence on the other end. Then, "Who is this?" "Would you believe maintenance tech?" More silence. Randall could practically hear Moltrek's brain working, recalculating the situation, trying to figure out what was happening. "You made a mistake," Moltrek finally said. "You should have stayed hidden. Now I know you exist, and I will find you. And when I do, I will make an example of you that will—" Randall keyed the ship's intercom system, overriding Moltrek's frequency and broadcasting to the entire vessel. "Here's the thing about threats, Moltrek. They work great when you have leverage. But right now, I'm in the walls. I know this ship better than you do, and I've got access to systems you don't even know exist. So let me make you a counteroffer." He paused, letting that sink in. "You and your crew get back on your ships. You undock, and you fly away. Do that, and everyone lives. Stay here, and I start introducing you to the concept of asymmetrical warfare. Your choice." In the cargo bay, Moltrek's face contorted in rage. He grabbed Captain Indra by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one massive hand. "Your maintenance tech just signed your death warrant, human. Tell him to surrender, or I start killing your crew." Indra, to her credit, managed to smile despite the pressure on her windpipe. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" "One human," Moltrek roared. "One cowardly human hiding in the walls. You think that frightens me?" "It should," Indra croaked, "because that's not just any human. That's Randall. And Randall doesn't hide because he's afraid. He hides because it's tactically advantageous." the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the cargo bay in red. The Ornathi crew shifted nervously, weapons raised, scanning for threats. Moltrek dropped Indra, his attention now divided between watching his surroundings and maintaining control of his increasingly nervous crew. Randall's voice came over the intercom again, calm, almost conversational. "Let me tell you about the Rimward siege, Moltrek. 15 cycles ago, 5 humans held off 400 marauders for 8 days. Want to know the secret? It wasn't superior firepower. It wasn't better armor. It was understanding that in enclosed spaces, numbers don't matter nearly as much as positioning, knowledge of terrain, and willingness to exploit every single advantage." A hissing sound began filling the cargo bay. Several Ornathi looked up at the ventilation grates. "That hissing?" Randall continued. "That's compressed nitrogen flooding sections of your choice. Non-toxic, don't worry. But combined with the environmental controls I just modified, it's going to make certain compartments very, very cold. Ornathi are cold-blooded, right? Wonder how that's going to work out for you." "Find him!" Moltrek bellowed. "Now!" 6 pirates charged toward the corridor exits. They made it 3 steps before the bulkhead doors slammed shut, controlled remotely, sealing the cargo bay. One Ornathi got caught in the closing door, his arm trapped. His screams echoed off the metal walls. "Did I mention I also have control of the airlocks?" Randall asked. "Because I do. Want to test whether your ship can dock fast enough to rescue everyone if I start venting atmosphere? I'm guessing no, but I'm willing to run the experiment if you are." Moltrek's crew was openly panicking now. This wasn't how raids were supposed to go. They were supposed to be the predators, the ones in control, not the ones being hunted by something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't even locate. "Stand down!" Moltrek roared at his own crew. "Hold your positions!" But fear was contagious, and the Ornathi were discovering what every species eventually learned about fighting humans. They had an unsettling talent for turning any environment into a weapon, and they really, really enjoyed psychological warfare. Another section of lighting went dark. When it came back up, one of the Ornathi guards was missing. Just gone. His weapon lay on the ground where he'd been standing. 12 pirates left, Randall announced helpfully. "How many would you like to take home with you, Moltrek?" Olani, pressed against the far wall with the other crew members, watched in fascination and horror as Moltrek's certainty crumbled. The pirate leader was spinning now, trying to watch every direction at once, his weapon tracking phantom movements. "You cannot win!" Moltrek shouted. "I have hostages! I will kill them all!" "Go ahead," Randall said, and there was something cold in his voice now, something that made even Indra shiver. "Kill them! And then what? You're still trapped in a ship controlled by someone who's spent his entire career learning how to eliminate threats in enclosed spaces. You're still outnumbered." "Outnumbered?" Moltrek laughed, but it sounded forced. "You are one human." "Am I?" The intercom went silent for a moment. When Randall spoke again, his voice was coming from multiple speakers, overlapping, making it impossible to pinpoint his location. "How many of me does it feel like right now, Moltrek? Because from where I'm sitting, controlling every system on this ship, watching you on 6 different camera feeds, it feels like you're the one who's outnumbered." Captain Indra, still on the ground but conscious, raised her voice. "Randall, don't kill them." A pause. "Captain, you made your point. They know what they're dealing with now. Give them the chance to leave." "They threatened my crew," Randall said quietly. "Our crew. And you scared them sufficiently. Now be professional." Another pause, Longer this time. Then, fine. Moltrek, you've got 60 seconds to get your people back to your ship. 59. 58. Moltrek stood frozen, pride warring with survival instinct. His remaining crew was already moving toward the boarding tube, discipline forgotten in their haste to escape. 45 seconds, Moltrek, Randall said. I'd hate for you to be late to your own departure. The pirate leader snarled, a sound of pure frustration, and turned toward the exit. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Indra. This is not over. Yeah, it is, Randall said, appearing suddenly at the opposite end of the cargo bay, knife in hand, looking completely relaxed and utterly dangerous. And if you ever come near this ship again, I'll make sure the entire sector knows that a single human sent you running. Imagine what that'll do for your reputation. Moltrek fled. There was no other word for it. The massive Ornathi warrior fled like a frightened hatchling, and his crew scrambled after him. The boarding tube detached. The Ornathi ships pulled away, engaging their drives and vanishing into the black with admirable speed. Silence filled the cargo bay. Then Olani started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity, the terror, the sheer audacity of what they'd just witnessed. It all came pouring out in wheezing, clicking laughter. Nilek wasn't laughing. He was staring at Randall with all the horror of someone who'd poked a sleeping predator and lived to regret it. Captain Indra pulled herself to her feet, rubbing her throat. Show off. Randall shrugged, sliding the knife back into its sheath. You hired me for ship security. I secured the ship. I hired you as a maintenance tech. Yeah, well, the environmental systems needed some adjustments anyway. He looked at the assembled crew, all of them staring at him with new eyes. So, I'm guessing everyone has questions. Just one, Indra said. How much do you want in bonus pay for this? Randall considered. The coffee in the mess is terrible. Get better coffee, and we'll call it even. He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving 23 crew members and one captain trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Nilok's voice, small and shaky, broke the silence. He really did hold off 400 marauders for 8 days, didn't he? Probably more like 500, Indra said. Randall's modest like that. Later, in the mess hall, Randall sat at his usual table with his knife, performing his usual maintenance. The engravings caught the light, each one a story, each one a reminder. The door opened. Olani entered, carrying 2 cups. She set one in front of Randall without asking permission, then sat down across from him. Thought you might want company, she said. Randall looked at the cup. Is this the terrible coffee? Or did the captain actually order the good stuff already? The terrible coffee? Good stuff won't arrive for another 3 cycles. Olani sipped her own cup, grimaced. Randall, can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Do you miss it? The TRC, the operations, She gestured vaguely. Everything? Randall was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the engravings on the knife. Finally, he said, every single day. And I'm grateful every single day that I don't have to do it anymore. Funny how both things can be true at once. He picked up the terrible coffee, took a sip, and smiled. But the coffee on the Rimward station was worse than this, so I guess things are improving. Olani laughed. They sat together in companionable silence, 2 crew members sharing terrible coffee on a merchant vessel that was absolutely, definitely not carrying one of humanity's most dangerous operators as their maintenance tech. Officially. The knife, resting on the table between them, caught the light one more time. Among the many engravings, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a single phrase etched in elegant script: peace through superior maintenance. Randall had always appreciated a good euphemism.